Um, Thank you, everybody, for joining. Welcome to the Happiest Minds Leadership Series on digital resilience. We started the series to learn and share together from the experiences of our customers, our partners, and technology leaders. And today, we focus on cyber resilience as an integral part of digital resilience. The UK government policy statement on cyber resiliency starts with the cyber resilience is key to operational resilience and business continuity, as well as the growth and the flourishing of the UK economy. And this is especially relevant in the context of the recent report that put the UK at the top of the cybercrime attack list. Now, the same cyber resiliency statement is valid for enterprises, both large and small. With companies adopting more and more digital technologies, it becomes critical for businesses to prioritize the protection of their data, their networks against cyber threats. And this requires a focus on implementing robust security, regular monitoring, educating employees on best practices for protecting company assets and data. And in the light of the number of devices that access core systems of record, systems of engagement, including IoT, industrial control systems, the rising use of AI to automate threats and launch attacks on a significantly larger scale. And in a recent conversation with the cybercrime head of Met Police, he said that the greatest threat for enterprises is from the inside. And therefore, the awareness for the employees in the monitoring is critical. And this, especially keeping in mind that we need to adhere to privacy. Now, add to all this, post-COVID, we've all gotten used to working from home, and hybrid working is here to stay. And zero trust is getting more important day by day. To discuss this in other important topics, may I introduce the speakers? We have Richard Potter, who is the Director for Digital Strategy, Microsoft Worldwide, who will come at it from a holistic perspective of digital. T.S. Narayanan, the CIO at GCX, and this is the networks company, which is literally the skeleton of the internet we take for granted. Now, T.S. has got a fantastic phrase for the way that he describes GCX. I'm not going to steal his thunder, but he's going to give us an insight on what mechanisms they have in place to protect their customers and themselves. And of course, Vijay Bharati, who is the CISO for Happiest Mind, but also is our global head of security. He advises customers across multiple industries and sizes of enterprises on how to protect their brand, the reputation, and the intellectual property while designing and implementing cybersecurity across the IT estate. And so my marketing team, who've been very active, are very keen that we engage the audience as early as possible. And so we will have a poll. And if you can take a minute just to look at the question, and then we will present the results of the poll as well. And then we'll get on to getting Richard and Tias and Vijay share some of the thoughts with us. This is interesting and very honest in terms of there is a lot to do more, but nobody believes the major uplift is required. So this is a really great start in terms of the poll. So Richard, let me start with you. Microsoft is well in everyone's digital life, enterprises or otherwise. Satya Nadella said cybersecurity is the biggest threat to digital transformation today, and it is the #1 risk facing every business going forward. What's Microsoft's approach to enabling companies securely driving digital transformation?
Yeah, brilliant. And Isaac, thank you so much for the opportunity to participate in this discussion with a terrific panel. I mean, let's level set where we are at the moment. I mean, we're in a time of change, a time of incredible uncertainty. But the biggest change, the biggest recalibration, the biggest set of uncertainties that we've seen in a generation at least. But also as a result of that uncertainty, out of the necessity of lockdown, as you alluded to in your introduction, a world of massive digitization, the shifting of business workloads, of social workloads, and everything in our lives into the digital world, out of expediency, out of necessity, because we had to move online for everything. And our natural inclination as human beings, as a species, to be social, to be connected, meant that we looked for the obvious way of keeping those connections up by digitizing those connections and moving them online. as a result of that and other economic and political events and activities over the last few years as well, we've compounded and created this incredible period of uncertainty. And Microsoft's view simply is that technology, from an economic point of view at least, is a deflationary investment to try and solve many of these problems. And that's a lovely, high-minded, simple view over the top of it. But it also comes with an acknowledgement that technology in itself is part of the headwinds of that uncertainty, and that opening up and digitization that we've done, whilst adding great advantages to the world, has also expanded the attack surface immensely, has made us more socially susceptible to threats, and not just the technical threats, but also the social threats of manipulation and being used as human beings as a vector into these digital experiences. And Microsoft, quite rightly, is responding to that acknowledgement that technology is also a challenge in this as well. And it approaches it from really giving the world the confidence to move forwards through this, the confidence to consolidate the existing operations and know that your existing operations are secure and safe, but also to create environments within which you can learn and experiment and scale and try new things as you move forwards. It's a very dynamic situation. It's a relentless effort. There is no complacency in the battle in this area at all, and it's something that we live and breathe in every role within Microsoft every day.
Perfect. Thank you, Richard. So that nicely moves in. You use deflationary investment. Technology is not by itself there, but it's a challenge by itself. Yes, what's your view? How do you see cyber as an inherent part of your digital resilience strategy? And how does it allow your team to try new things using technology, but keeping things safe at the same time?
Yes. So I'm going to touch upon the point that you made about the story I was going to say. A couple of years ago, I was reading two articles, and the headlines on those two articles startled me, and it took me a while for the impact to sink in, despite the fact that I work for a subsea carrier, right? And the two headlines, I'm not repeating them verbatim, something on the lines of the following. One headline was, "The reality is that the cloud is actually under the ocean." And the second headline was, "The internet isn't in the cloud, it's under the ocean thanks to the subsea networks." So as a subsea telco, we run this business of running a high bandwidth network across practically all the oceans in the world. And then you look at our customers, they are the other carriers, the OTTs, large enterprises. Look at the volume of traffic, look at the nature of traffic that flows through these networks. And it takes us a while for the importance of this to sink in. So coming to the context of your question, what we are having to continuously look at is managing resilience from a number of aspects. But the most important one of them becomes operational risk management. What happens if you have a failure in the high seas? What happens if a route goes down? What happens if you lose capacity? Right? So, and then this opens up a huge landscape of things that we need to do for operational risk. And cyber becomes a very important aspect simply because of the volume and the nature of the traffic that we are carrying. So you have the network. So the ecosystem becomes bigger and more complex. You have a network, and then you have a whole ecosystem for monitoring and managing that network. And then you have an ecosystem of people, internal, external, third parties that need to work, access the network, and manage all of this. And then the overhang of managing the ever-increasing threat surface makes cyber a very important aspect of how we manage our resilience. And I'm sure there's a number of technologies and areas that we are going to discuss as we move through this webinar. So I'll kind of stop with this introduction here, and I'm sure we're going to have more exciting discussions through the rest of the session.
So you touched on a very core aspect of your business, which is operational risk management. And I really like your phrase that the cloud is under the ocean. It literally is, I guess, to a large extent. So Vijay, from your point of view, I mean, you work with companies of different sizes, with incredible complexities. And operational risk is probably on top of the agenda. So, but it includes everything that TS and his company leave to connect on to our customers, right? At which point on there are things that we have to take care of. What are you seeing as commonly the challenges that enterprises face when they're trying to design and implement, keeping in mind the technology is changing on a continual basis, and you have attacks and sophistication in attacks changing on a regular basis?
Sure. Thanks, Isaac. Thanks, everyone, for this opportunity. So definitely, Isaac, I mean, cybersecurity has always been a challenge, right? And probably one of the biggest reasons for that is we have always been playing a catch-up game, right? We have always focused on cybersecurity, trying to look at, right, what are the various attacks, what bad things are happening, and trying to build some systems around that in terms of taking a little bit more reactive approach in terms of handling the overall cybersecurity space, right? And to me, right, when we look at cyber resiliency, the biggest point there is, can we take a proactive approach, right? Can we start anticipating the kind of challenges we can face, whether on the operational risk side or the overall risk, and start anticipating those risks and start preparing for those to make sure that that whatever digital infrastructure is being put, right, the adequate level of cyber resilience is built into it. So one of the biggest challenge which I definitely see when I talk to a lot of organizations, right? I mean, how does security being seen as an enabler instead of barriers to digital adoption, right? Because of the rapid digitization which Richard spoke about, right? Businesses really wants to move fast, and security should not be standing in a way, right? Trying to slow them down. And then there have been cases, right? For example, take a traditional process of DevOps, where security is introduced as part of running some of those static and dynamic code scans. But some of those things are still not very contextualized to the kind of application or the kind of development or kind of stories which are being built, right? So, which again end up creating a lot of false positives, slowing that whole story cycle down. Similarly, when you're trying to provision some of those images onto a cloud infrastructure, right? At that point in time, start defining some of those policies, again, slows things down, right? So very, very important thing, security has to start transforming themselves to be seen as an enabler, help business move at the rapid speed which they really want to do to enjoy the complete benefit of digitization. Fortunately, a lot of vendors, again, thanks to Microsoft, AWS, a lot of players in the market, there's a lot of tools and technology available there in terms of to be able to achieve the desired level of digital resilience and cyber resilience. Of course, it is challenging, but I can touch upon that going forward, right? In terms of how some of the things which we are, some of the approaches which we are adopting in making sure that, again, security is seen as an enabler. It's part of the overall business value chain when it comes to digitization.
So TS, if I come back to you from a CIO's viewpoint, what is your viewpoint on the points that Vijay made, which is if there is security is seen as an enabler or a barrier, and how does it actually help from a digital transformation point?
Oh, absolutely. I think the days where we thought that security was a bureaucratic impediment are definitely gone. Because the technologies that have been used in enhancing enterprises' security posture are actually enabling, whether it's simple automation capability or the technologies available to analyze all the incidents, events available, and to sift that huge swath of information to identify what's a threat, what's a false positive, and to give the business the right insights. Otherwise, if we didn't have these technologies, imagine trying to live in a world where we are trying to do that manually, or we didn't have the insights, right? The ability to monitor, the technologies that are available to analyze, monitor, and take decisions are definitely enablers. And therefore, all the technologies that are available to a CIO or the CISO are actually genuinely, significantly helping and accelerating digital transformation. And that's bringing us to say, we need to start using these technologies and these processes and techniques. For example, you talk about security by design. These are things that, yes, are there in the industry, but weren't done very consciously several years ago. So I'm quite emphatic about the fact that these are absolute enablers and accelerators, and in no way an impediment of any kind.
Okay, so Richard, if I come to you and touch upon what TS was saying in terms of insights, but there is a very interesting trend that's also happening on the side, which is on zero trust. Why is that being bandied? I almost find it, as a layperson from a security point of view, that it kind of has a negative connotation, but it's not. It's actually about making sure people, process, technologies, intellectual property is protected. What's your take on the whole zero trust angle?
Yeah, I mean, it's an acknowledgement really of a very pragmatic way of recognizing all of this, the overwhelming threat that sits out there, and I mean, I think people have different interpretations of what zero trust is, but specifically from a Microsoft point of view, we think about it in terms of three elements really. Firstly, there's a significant focus on verification on the gateway into environments, and that's everything that we would do around authentication, and not just MFA, but sort of the meta-analysis on the devices and the temporal component of when access is happening, and sort of just making sure that gateway is absolutely optimized to letting the right people in at the right point in time. And then there is this idea of least privileged access. So this concept of just enough access is enormous, and revisiting regularly that just enough access. So, not opening the whole door, just opening and setting up structures that enable you to sort of increment people into places, and withdrawing it when it's no longer needed. So that's sort of the minimization of that access is always fundamental in there. And then finally, there is this overarching concept, which is really the underlying thing of zero trust, which is that assume a breach, assume if not a breach, but assume an attack. The attacks will happen all the time. You are never going to stop them, So therefore it's wise to assume of what the consequences of a successful attack would be in there. These are points that TS was very clearly elaborating there about the design of your architectures and your systems is fundamental, that you're minimizing the impact should that breach happen. And accepting that encryption is fundamental. It's a cost, if you like, that is absolutely necessary in there. But everything is infused with telemetry and analytics as well, so that you've got early tripwires, early detection of these breaches that assume to be taking place. I should say that all we're trying to do here is to acknowledge that these organizations that we're now building are organizations that fundamentally we're trying to trust everybody to innovate within. So all of this is about creating environments of trust. And think of the difference that's happening, certainly in our lifetimes here, is that innovation originally used to be done in laboratories, in nice little confined spaces by the equivalents of people in white coats that would sort of have a dedicated innovation budget, and they would go away and have an epiphany and invest in the next best thing for us. We're now in a world where innovation cycles are fast and expansive. And so organizations, boardrooms, are rightfully trying to create organizations where that is democratized, where everybody is able to contribute to innovation. Microsoft builds features and solutions around low code, no code to enable innovation in software development to happen across the organization. So all we're trying to create here is an environment within which that innovation cycle can happen democratically across a wider organization. And therefore you're creating these nice little guardrails, these nice little environments within which that everybody can do that safely. So it turns the chief security officer into effectively the chief innovation enabler. That's the world that we're trying to create here.
So Vijay, I think Richard has just managed to change your role from chief security officer to chief innovation officer. But let's take a quick shot on what are you doing with Zero Trust right now? And it would be good to get some feedback from everyone. And please, if you've got any questions, please put them into the chat. We'll have visibility of it and try and answer as many of those as possible as well. So appreciate if you can respond to the poll, but please do ask questions via the chat, and we'll respond to them. Thank you. Good. Again, very, very, very encouraging to see nobody having no plans, which is fantastic. So Vijay, that brings us to the question of what all of you have been actually very consistently saying about security being an enabler, right? Versus the barrier, which is, I think, where you started off with. And now you've got this I in CISO becoming innovation. So chief innovation and security officer is how you need to position yourself, Vijay. But when we talk about trust in the form that Richard is touched on, right? So trusting everybody to be able to create an environment of innovation. There is a Kaspersky research which basically said that 46% of cyber incidents can be attributed to careless or uninformed staff, right? Which is essentially what you're trying to protect to a large extent. And the fact that you assume breach as part of Zero Trust. What are you seeing as part of the implementations or early stage conversations that you're having with customers on Zero Trust, given the context of regulation? Right, because every industry has got huge amounts of regulation. Take the telco industry; the TSA is in place right now, for example. Right. So how is that? How are the two coming together from your perspective?
Yeah, I think Isaac, as Richard mentioned, right. I mean, there's a lot of new technologies which are being adopted by businesses, right. And this is a very based on the kind of objectives they have. They they have to adopt these technologies. But some of the challenge which we see is, are they adopting these in a secure and compliant manner, right? And that's where a lot of our work, which is going, which we are helping our customers with, right? In terms of how do we make sure that as part of that innovation, right, as part of adoption of new technologies, adoption of new ways of delivering IT, the whole risk and trust element has been addressed, right? So we are kind of working with customers to make sure that cybersecurity is started looked into early stage of any large digital program. To put in some context, almost 60% of cloud security assessments which we do today, we find there are misconfigurations, there are security loopholes, right? And it's not fundamentally the flaw from the technology, be it AWS, be it Azure, or any other. It is how it is configured, right? So that's one of the area which needs we all need to be careful with. The adoption of a lot of new technologies also brings in additional risk element, right? In terms of how do you again bring the whole trust element? How do you really make it secure from a cyber resiliency perspective? So that's where we have seen a number of frameworks which really work as a very helpful guides, right, to help you drive towards maybe assessing what's your current maturity level as part of some of your digital transformation program, which also gives you some scale in terms of where you are heading as part of the overall cyber resiliency as part of your digital program. We kind of heavily used something called NIST CSF, which is cybersecurity framework from NIST, which gives you a nice framework to look at multiple areas of the life cycle of overall operational IT operations, right, and try to identify your capability of identify, detect, protect, respond, and recover to any cybersecurity incidents as part of that life cycle. There have been other frameworks, for example, resilience management framework from CERT, Department of Defense from US, which has been quite famous in terms of resiliency engineering side, right? Now, one of the key thing which that framework really talk about is the whole idea of anticipation. And as I started earlier, right? I mean, the proactiveness and anticipation is the whole key of your cyber resiliency journey. Unless you can anticipate, you have to anticipate, right, what kind of risk and threats which are available or which are happening in the market. Last year we have seen huge number of increase in ransomware attack, for example, right? We have seen cases of a large number of third-party risks, right? Whether it was Log4j, whether it was SolarWinds. So a very key critical component of your overall cyber resiliency journey is anticipation of what are the current challenges, what are the current threats, and then try to bake in the required security measures as early as in your digital programs to make sure when you are configuring some of these new environments, when you are designing and defining some of these new digital capabilities, they are done in a manner which will really help you to safeguard against some of those kind of incidents.
Okay, so TS, if I come back to you in terms of from a scaling point of view, and the ability to use frameworks, all frameworks don't fit everybody, correct? Most companies tend to use some kind of either they keep to the same framework or they try and mix frameworks together to do it. What is your approach in terms of, because you have a very different business than the normal enterprise in place. What is your approach to some of these frameworks and regulatory aspects that you're trying to incorporate and still manage to keep enabler and trust into the equation?
I mean, if you look at the different frameworks, whether it's NIST or ISO, to name a couple, at the core, the fundamental principles remain the same, right? You have things to do in terms of either identification or monitoring. In the NIST framework, you have the identify, recover, respond, etc., and then you have the controls in ISO and so on and so forth. But ultimately, the core of what these frameworks say are almost exactly the same with minor variations to accommodate local regulations, right? So every enterprise, depending on where they operate, and many enterprises are fairly global, need to have a realistic awareness of what the different frameworks say. And even if you follow one or the other, or a pragmatic mix of a few standards, it's going to be hugely helpful. It's probably less relevant about following a framework and more relevant to follow what's broadly said in these frameworks, is my view. And there is no right or wrong framework. It's about following the underlying core principles, which are fundamentally the same.
And therefore, the point that I think Richard and Vijay were making earlier in terms of automating or increasing, kind of an implicit adoption at the design stage, and therefore the insights that will be created will help. Richard, if I just touch on the nation state cyber and all the other very interesting things that are going on, especially since the war in Ukraine, things are starting to come out, but it's been going on for quite a while, hasn't it?
Yeah, and I mean, we're nearing obviously the 12-month anniversary of the special operation, invasion, whatever you want to call it. But from a Microsoft point of view, you can imagine that even before those missiles were launched, before the sort of the tank tracks started rolling and everything like that, the war began in cyberspace, and Microsoft worked very closely with not just Ukraine but all of the other regional interested parties to try and mitigate lots of those attacks. I mean, incidentally, I should say that much of the initial work that Microsoft was doing was just simply moving workloads into public cloud. The initial attacks were primarily on premise, on local data centers, effectively. So just simply moving it into a cloud environment came with the defense that these environments are now equipped with. But I think the other really distinctive thing, which I think has a really good analogy for any big global enterprise wherever you are, but also more local enterprises, is that it's all about collaboration. The attack surface, the threat surface is so broad nowadays. This is not a whack-a-mole approach to security. This is something where you have to actually form partnerships across not just your supply chain, but also your customers and your employees. Educating as much as you can, equipping them with all of those great facilities that you would love to be doing internally as well, and working collaboratively with all of the interests of all of these parties. It doesn't need a sort of a big global incident like the Ukraine incident to make people realize how important collaboration is in everything in this space.
Yeah, I think we've got a couple of questions that have come up. Let me take the first one. So I think, TS, this is probably asking you from a CIO point of view. What do you see as the challenges for the cybersecurity teams to achieve cyber resilience? And maybe Vijay, you can add.
Say that again.
What are the typical challenges that you see for cybersecurity teams to achieve cyber resilience? And an associated question with that is, how can Zero Trust help or enhance the cyber resiliency? Your view as a CIO, and maybe Vijay, your perspective in terms of having implemented some of these to multiple other customers. Yeah. So TS, we can start with you.
Yeah. Two parts of the question, right? One is what are the challenges and how do I see them, and how does Zero Trust, right? If you look at a CIO's perspective, there's a number of aspects to the CIO's world. One is all enterprises in today's world are in a continuous state of some transformation or the other, some digital transformation or the other. That typically involves building new capability, new features, legacy migration, et cetera, right? And therefore, managing that in terms of the security by design is something that's very critical. And we have to do that consciously, right? The second is what we already discussed earlier through various parts of this session, is creating operational visibility. Is to say, how do I have the capability to monitor and find out what's happening in my landscape, right? So when you put these things together in the context of the DevSecOps, all of things are covered, right? Whether you're going to build new capability, building in security by design, and then you have the right infrastructure, framework, technology, investments for monitoring and giving you continuous visibility on a threat environment that's continuously becoming more and more onerous. But more important, in my personal view, the third and the most important aspect is being highly aware of the business context. Because now if you look at it from a CIO's lens, the IT team, and for that matter, different teams in an enterprise need to have lots of awareness. If you take the IT team or the security team, they need to understand the business. They need to understand the technology. They need to understand the security requirements. Hey, and depending on the environment, you need to understand, somebody in IT needs to understand contractual obligations, because only then they can build in the monitoring and tools to be compliant. You need to understand the regulatory requirements for reporting, for compliance, for managing incidents, for reporting events in different countries. So if you are a company like we are operating in multiple countries, the number of combinations or the number of use cases, the number of scenarios that you have to deal with becomes several X. And therefore, the awareness that the IT teams need to have is quite huge. Not important, not only is that important, it's important to spread that awareness. And therefore, other functions become responsible, right? How do I do compliance training, right? So there's a training and the awareness creation. There's campaigns that you need to run. Practically every company runs simulations, phishing attacks, and so on and so forth. So having awareness and spreading the awareness, right, to all teams. So people that are selling deals will need to understand contractual obligations related to security reporting towards their customers. So this kind of builds a lot of tentacles across every function of the company. And the CIO or the CISO and a number of functions have an important role to play in creating that awareness. Now, the second question is about zero trust, before I forget that you did. And touching upon what Richard said, the fundamental principles and the pillars remain the same, right? And if you look back, and I know you made an observation that the term zero trust has a negative connotation, but if you hark back to the ages of old, zero trust is nothing but things that we said before. You know, even before we had a lot of automation and tools, we said, we use this expression, need to know basis. Zero trust is nothing but a need to know basis with a number of features attached to the need to know basis, right? And how can, so the question was, how can zero trust enhance your cyber resilience and your posture? Is by actually addressing all the aspects, all the fundamental principles, right? And zero trust is not binary. It's about need to know basis. It's about least privilege. It's about giving access when required and then taking it off. It's about continuously monitoring. So these are things that definitely allow enterprises to continuously enhance their security posture by looking at the fundamental principles and building the process and the technology to live by those principles.
Thank you, TS. Vijay, quickly.
Yeah. So if
Sure.
I can just add to what TS said, right, and that's what I also believe, right? I mean, proactiveness is the key for cyber resiliency, and zero trust is built over on the whole concept of proactiveness, right? In terms of uh, assume breach, right, which is one of the key pillar of zero trust, right, and thus the whole monitoring and detection and response kind of capability which you build around your digital enterprise, right, has to be effectively able to operate continuously to identify it if anything abnormal is seen in that environment. Similarly, as TS talked about, need to know basis, verify explicitly. So this zero trust gives you a very proactive approach to security, which eventually will help you to understand and not only understand, but being able to incorporate the required elements of security into your overall digital enterprise, which will be very effective in terms of protecting you against some of these attacks, and also being able to detect this on a timely basis, right? So I was talking about NIST, CSF, the whole idea of the whole anticipation and preparedness, proactive preparedness. I think zero trust will definitely help in terms of taking that proactive approach to security.
Thank you. Before everyone thinks that I'm busy checking my social media, no, I'm not. I'm trying to look at the questions that are coming in. Uh, just to touch on, what are the frameworks that you have currently implemented within your organization? Just good to get a view of some of them, and if it's others, it'd be good if you can let us know what they are, either in the chat or in the response itself. So give you a minute to just take that. Good. Please keep those questions coming in, and thank you very much. I think everybody is on ISO, which is fantastic, including the Nest, and then there are a few others who've got others onto it, but good to get a view of it. Interesting. This has been a very interesting poll. I've never seen 0% on any poll. So this is really fascinating for me to see on all the three questions. All three of you, I just wanted you to give your perspective on this as we come to the close, and then I will give a summary overall. All of you have talked about proactiveness, awareness, training, and things being enabling. How much, and this is, security has now become a board level topic. This is something that everybody is very familiar. How much of corporate or exec level involvement is required as part of that whole journey? And how involved are the management teams from your perspective in leadership teams that you have seen? Just your personal observation. And TS, we will not hold you accountable because it's not a thing, but just your perspective in what your observations are.
Yes.
And same with you, Vijay, and same Richard.
Yeah.
Good to get that.
I mean, I'll begin with the cliched expression that a top-down approach is key to everything. Number one. Number two, executive sponsorship is key. Number three, and we've talked about it, creating awareness is very important. And therefore, you start with a top-down approach, executive involvement and sponsorship, then things percolate down the organization quite rapidly. And you asked me for my personal observation, and I will still give it, both from our organization and what I think I'd like to believe is happening in many peer organizations. I think the days of, in the olden days, you got investments in security only on the back of an incident. I think that world has changed because there's greater awareness and enterprises are recognizing that investments made to manage cyber resilience are actually well spent. Yes, the degree of investments might vary depending on the size of the organization, budgets, and so on and so forth, but the will to make pragmatic investments in technology to proactively protect enterprises, in my personal opinion, is definitely there, because I think all of us have watched the industry for a reasonably long period to know that there's companies getting attacked all the time. And therefore, taking a proactive approach and a pragmatic approach to investments is now becoming second nature to executive management teams, to recognize that organizations need to continuously enhance their security posture. And we're also recognizing that this is not a one-time exercise, that you spend a bunch of money on a security initiative. This is an ongoing process. And people are trying to mix to get the right balance of investment versus a pragmatic approach. And that's good enough, because let's face it, everyone's resources, whether it's in terms of technology or people or budgets to build the shiniest technology, is going to be limited. But the fact that we are willing to take pragmatic approaches is in itself a very good sign, in my view.
Thank you, TS. Vijay?
Yeah, I think, Isaac, I mean, see, I strongly believe, I think, for this to be successful, and we are definitely seeing it, there's a lot of awareness at board, there's a lot of support at level in terms of understanding, and specifically around ransomware, the whole cyber risk and all, right? But I think what's important is to be enabled to this continuous flow of information, the setting up that culture of proactiveness, as PS touched about, secure by design, right? We also talk about privacy by default. Privacy is also very, very important, right? And then being able to start adopting those principles. And if you have to start taking a proactive approach, readiness to cyber resiliency, you not only need IT, right? You need your legal team to have some say in that, your marketing team, right? So everybody has to be part of that whole preparedness. And if those things are driven by the board level, and that the whole culture of information flow between security and other teams has been enabled, that will definitely help. And we are seeing a lot of that all happening already across the industries.
Thank you. Richard, just few final words.
I mean, just briefly, I mean, TS and Vijay have nailed it, really. I think from my perspective, at least, both from living inside Microsoft and knowing what Microsoft's boardroom talks about, but also working with other boardrooms as an advisor, the conversation in the boardroom is typically around trust. Trust is valuable in every way. It adds share price value. It sort of enables organizations to function effectively. But the sweet spot that we've got is playing this clever little tension between the fact that there is a positive story of trust, but the solution is zero trust. And finding that sweet spot of, from a CISO point of view, of kind of pointing out that kind of tension and you know, and discord that potentially sits there, that's a really compelling way to think this through, in my perspective.
Perfect. We have one more question that's popped up, and I'm going to leave it to any one of you who wants to answer that. How are you managing cyber resilience when the supply chain is constantly changing due to transformation?
I'm happy to take that.
Yeah, that's fine, Tia. Thank you.
Yeah, it comes back to supply. When does the supply chain transform? Is when you're transforming technology, right? You're bringing in new technology, and you bring in new technology, and therefore the supply chain changes, right? And it comes back to the fundamental principles that we discussed. Is when we are transforming, bringing in new supply chain elements, bringing in the security by design is very important. To say, yes, here's what I'm transforming. I'm building in a new component, a new piece of off-the-shelf software, or an entire transformation program, and then looking at the end-to-end architecture and making sure that's built in, making sure that you have the right relationship with the third party, and then your third-party risk management processes, etc. And then the commercial and contractual elements of how you manage that are all integral to this piece, in my view. And it's a very good question, because this is going to happen all the time. Every company is in a reasonable state of constant transformation. And therefore, making this a part of the ecosystem, making this a part of the DNA is very important. So we do it by habit in terms of having these processes, these checklists, these questionnaires, while we transform and keep adding technology and therefore changes to the supply chain.
Thank you.
If I can just add to that, Isaiah.
Sure. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. So as TS mentioned, right? I mean, the whole vendor risk management, third-party risk management, and that's again a key to cyber resiliency, right? Because we are today dependent on so many third parties, and so I think a little bit transformation is also required in terms of the way we have been doing some of the third-party risk management programs, right? We traditionally have been following annual assessment, right? A categorization of some of these vendors and a questionnaire-based approach. But I think they are so critical in that the overall cyber resiliency achievement that we have to take a little bit more data-driven approach to third-party risk management, right? In terms of continuously assessing what's the risk associated with that third party, not only just by looking at some of the questionnaires and other processes which are being followed, but continuously being able to monitor any threats and vulnerabilities which could exist for that particular vendor, right? Or be proactively looking into deep web, dark web, using threat intelligence services to try to again identify if somebody is talking about any kind of potential threat against those suppliers, right? And instead of doing it again on a very periodic basis, I have seen majority of the time it's happening on an annual basis, right? But 1 year is a long term for your overall security posture to change. So we have to get into a continuous monitoring evaluation kind of a model and a little bit more data-driven kind of approach, given the kind of challenges today's organizations are facing from third parties, right? And then specifically from UK, Europe perspective, right? There has been a lot of focus. TS will be aware, telecom, PSA, I think 50% of the requirements are focused on third-party risk. Similarly, the EU's Cyber Resiliency Act, right? There's a lot of talk about in terms of how the third-party risk needs to be managed and mitigated, right? So I think we need to, again, as I was talking about, along with digitization, we have to leverage some of these capabilities to kind of mature some of those programs as well. That's my view, given the TPRM program I have seen in the industry.
Good. Thank you, Vijay. So let me try and summarize. And if I don't do a good job, you can beat me up. These three wonderful gentlemen have been fantastic. So, Richard, you talked about deflationary investment in terms of security, right? In addressing what is not just an economic challenge, but also the fact that it is actually necessary to be an enabler, build trust, and within organizations. TS, Vijay, you talked a lot in terms of the security by design, making sure that regulation frameworks and the people in functions have the business context, but actually the most important thing being proactiveness and being pragmatic in terms of what you're doing. The operational visibility, especially of risk, and having insights driven. So Vijay, on your last point in terms of third party risk, being data driven, etc., is what we need to do. But thank you very much for the insights that you've shared with us, Richard, TS, and Vijay. Very sincerely appreciated. And good luck, and hope all of you have enjoyed the webinar as well. There'll be a feedback that will be sent back to you. Please keep sending us feedback. We'd like to improve on ourselves. And we will continue the leadership series over the course of the next few months as well. Thanks again, everyone. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Yeah, thank you.